Caroline Levitt was publicly humiliated, but her response left everyone in shock. The camera glides through the luxurious ballroom of the Hotel Palacio Imperial in Buenos Aires. Majestic chandeliers cast their golden glow over the polished marble, reflecting the elegant steps of the evening's guests. The cultural gala is in full swing, filled with influential figures, politicians, intellectuals, and artists, all engaged in subtle conversations and calculated glances. But there is something in the air beyond the scent of expensive perfume and the clinking of champagne glasses. There is tension. Among the guests, a few figures stand out. Journalists exchange hurried whispers, their eyes sharp on every detail. The presence of young Caroline Levitt, the government's conservative spokesperson, would already be enough to stir conversation. But the murmurs intensify when a new figure crosses the ballroom. Francisco Duarte, a renowned pianist, a natural provocateur, and, above all, a man who knows exactly how to turn any event into a spectacle. He doesn't just make an entrance. He commands a room. His mere presence forces heads to turn, bodies to stiffen. Francisco stops beside the grand piano, runs his fingers over its gleaming surface, and smiles. He knows Caroline is there, and he knows exactly what to say to make this night unforgettable. Music, an invisible, overwhelming force, is about to become the centerpiece of an unexpected confrontation. But what no one realizes is that this time, the true performance of the night will not come from the renowned pianist's hands, but from someone who abandoned their art long ago. Someone who is about to remind the world who they truly are. The hushed conversation among the guests grows louder as Caroline Levitt crosses the ballroom. Her navy blue dress, perfectly tailored, reflects her personality. Elegant, composed, strategic. Each step is calculated, and every glance she receives is meticulously ignored. There is something almost mechanical about her posture, a shield carefully built over the years, protecting her from the relentless criticism her political stance attracts. She is not here for entertainment. She never is. For Caroline, events like this are a battlefield where every word, every gesture must be chosen with precision. Her advisor, David Miller, stays close, whispering updates about the guests and potential traps of the night. But she already knows which one will be the biggest. On the other side of the ballroom, Francisco Duarte has already become the center of attention. He doesn't have to try. His mere presence is magnetic. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, though with his tie slightly loosened, he exudes the confident nonchalance of someone who considers himself above that political elite. He is not just a talented pianist. He is a cultural resistance icon, adored by intellectuals and artists alike. If Caroline is discipline and restraint, Francisco is rebellion and improvisation. He knows she is there, and that amuses him. With a crooked smile, he raises his glass to a small group of admirers and, without bothering to hide his irony, lets slip a comment that makes the nearby journalists lean in, eager to catch every word. They say we have an esteemed guest tonight. Caroline Levitt, the great defender of traditional values. I wonder if she's here to give us a speech or perhaps a recital. Muffled laughter ripples through the room. Caroline hears it but does not react. Her face remains expressionless, but inside, something stirs. It's not anger, it's something deeper. Meanwhile, Raphael, an old friend and advisor, approaches her, observing Francisco with a watchful gaze. You don't have to engage, Caroline. He wants a spectacle, don't give it to him. She exhales softly. She has no intention of taking the bait. But deep down, something tells her this night will be different. The ballroom of the Hotel Palacio Imperial hums with subtle conversations and strategic glances, but everything changes when Francisco Duarte decides to raise the stakes. He runs his fingers along the rim of his wine glass, letting his provocation seep into the charged atmosphere of the gala. With a smirk, he takes a step forward, drawing all eyes to him. His gaze finally lands on Caroline, who has remained impassive amidst the storm of expectations. Ladies and gentlemen, he begins, his velvety voice carrying a theatrical flair. Tonight is a tribute to art, to freedom of expression, to talent, and to the unexpected. But I wonder, what would art be without those who try to contain it? Without those who dictate what should or should not be appreciated? The provocation is clear. The ballroom splits. Some laugh discreetly. Others exchange tense glances. Journalists prepare to capture every word. Caroline, however, does not move. Francisco continues, now addressing her directly. I've been told that our esteemed Caroline Levit has a rather curious relationship with music. But is it merely a distant memory, or something that still lives within her? The challenge has been issued. The audience waits, eager for her reaction. David Miller, ever watchful, lightly touches Caroline's arm, a silent reminder not to fall into the trap. Beside her, Raphael's expression darkens, anticipating the confrontation ahead. At last, Caroline lifts her gaze. She does not need to reply immediately. Her mere presence is an answer in itself. With measured steps, she crosses the ballroom, closing the distance between her and Francisco. The silence deepens. "Music, Mr. Duarte," she says, her voice sharp yet composed, does not need empty speeches to prove its worth. The remark is precise, cutting. But Francisco is unfazed. If anything, his smile widens. "Ah, so you agree that it should speak for itself?" He lets his fingers glide over the grand piano's keys, producing a soft, almost careless chord. "How about giving us a demonstration?" Now, the challenge is not just verbal. It is public. It is inevitable. And the audience waits to see whether Caroline will retreat or face the piano. The challenge lingers in the air, heavy like a storm about to break. The entire ballroom holds its breath, awaiting Caroline's response. Francisco leans casually against the piano, his fingers idly brushing the keys, as if the victory were already his. Caroline, however, remains still. Outwardly, she is impassive, but inside, something stirs. The piano before her is not just an instrument. It is a portal to a past she buried long ago. For a fleeting moment, memories flash through her mind. Endless nights at the piano, fingers dancing over the keys with freedom and passion. The vibrant sound filling every corner of the house. The proud gleam in her father's eyes, the whispered encouragement from her mother. And then silence. The silence that came when she chose politics over music. The moment she closed the piano lid for the last time, convinced that art was nothing more than a luxury in a world that demanded strength and pragmatism. Francisco watches her, studying every detail of her hesitation. He sees the internal struggle, senses the crack forming in the wall Caroline spent years building. David Miller steps closer once again, his voice low and firm. "Caroline, ignore this. It's not worth it." Beside her, Raphael keeps his gaze steady, concern etched in his features. He knows her well enough to recognize that, beneath the silence, a battle is raging. She could walk away, let the challenge fade into the background of other conversations. But something inside her refuses to be silenced. Something that pulses insistent, reminding her that what defines her is not just politics. It's who she has always been. The question now is not whether she can play. It's whether she is willing to face what music still means to her. And Caroline isn't sure the answer. The heavy silence shatters with a sudden movement. Caroline, her eyes fixed on the piano, takes a step toward the instrument. The soft chord Francisco continues to play in the background seemed to fade, as if the world has narrowed down to just her and her decision. With deliberate calm, she pulls out the piano bench and sits before the keys. The weight of the moment is almost tangible, and the audience, once divided between curiosity and mockery, now watches with an almost reverent anticipation. Francisco, who had been so certain of his victory, narrows his eyes, intrigued. Caroline hesitates for only a second, her gaze fixed on the polished wood of the piano. Her right hand reaches out to the keys, and the first touch is light, almost tentative. The sound that emerges is soft, a note carrying a strange mix of doubt and promise. But as she feels the familiar texture of the keys beneath her fingers, something within her shifts. The fear vanishes, replaced by a confidence she didn't know she still possessed. Hesitation gives way to growing fluidity. Each movement now becomes a statement, not just against Francisco, but against everything she had buried within herself. The audience watches in absolute silence, as if witnessing something far greater than a simple musical performance. Francisco, who had once leaned back in amused disdain, now sits up straight, his skeptical gaze giving way to a mix of surprise and unease. Caroline, still unsure of how far she can go, surrenders to the music. She begins to play with greater intensity, each chord carrying the weight of her struggles. The audience starts to understand what is unfolding. This is not merely a performance. It is a rebirth. As Caroline's fingers glide across the keys, the music, once distant, almost forgotten, comes alive. The sound, now stronger and more assured, reverberates through the ballroom with an intensity that leaves no room for doubt. The audience, initially hesitant, starts to shift, their expressions transforming. What began as a provocation has become something deeper, a personal and artistic revelation that no one had anticipated. Caroline plays with renewed passion, each note flowing with a natural ease that astonishes even her. Her technique is impeccable, but what truly stands out is the raw emotion pouring into every chord. She is no longer there to justify her political stance or defend an ideology. She is playing for herself, expressing something far greater than any speech or game of power. The audience watches in breathless silence, their eyes fixed on her. The sound of the piano is now the only thing that matters, filling the space and drowning out all judgments. And as Caroline moves further into the piece, she transforms before their eyes. The cold, calculating woman of politics fades away, making room for the artist who had long been suffocated by the expectations and pressures of the outside world. Francisco, who had been watching with a sarcastic smile, is now motionless. What he thought would be a moment of humiliation for Caroline has turned into something far more unsettling. He, the acclaimed pianist, now finds himself challenged by someone who, supposedly, had abandoned music. And Caroline's performance is not just a response to him. It is a response to everyone who believed she was a one-dimensional figure, defined solely by her political beliefs. The audience begins to shift, exchanging surprised and admiring glances. Some even rise to their feet, at first applauding hesitantly, but soon with growing enthusiasm. Caroline's gesture is not just technical. It is a declaration of authenticity. She is reclaiming something lost, something that should never have been forgotten. The final chords resonate through the air, vibrating with the power of her transformation. Caroline does not look at anyone, but she feels the weight of the change within her. She is no longer the rigid and calculating spokesperson who walked into that room. She is someone far more complex, more genuine. And as she finally lifts her hands from the piano, the ballroom erupts into applause. The sound is deafening, but for Caroline, it is more than a victory. It is the reclaiming of her own identity. The room, which moments ago had been divided between curiosity and skepticism, is now united by a single emotion: admiration. The applause reverberates off the walls of the Hotel Palacio Imperial, a roar of recognition that fills the space. Caroline, still seated at the piano, allows herself a brief moment of silence. She feels the warmth of the audience, but she does not seek anyone's gaze. The music had already done its work of reclaiming her identity, and now she absorbs the reaction without urgency. The applause, initially timid, swells into a vibrant, unstoppable ovation. The crowd claps not just for her skill, but for the strength of her transformation. What once seemed impossible has become reality. The woman who hid behind an inflexible political stance is now an authentic artist, one filled with vulnerability and, most importantly, courage. David Miller, who had warned her against this confrontation, watches in stunned silence. Raphael, on the other hand, smiles with quiet pride. He always knew that Caroline carried something within her that could not be contained, but he also knew that she had to find that part of herself on her own. Now, seeing her flourish before everyone, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, is something he will never forget. Francisco, meanwhile, remains frozen. The arrogance that once dominated his expression is now absent. He watches Caroline with a look of surprise, respect, and discomfort. He never imagined she was capable of such a performance. The idea of challenging her had seemed irresistible, but now he realizes that his provocation did not just fail. It was transformed into a public lesson in humility and artistry. The pianist tries, unsuccessfully, to mask his frustration. He claps, but reluctantly, as if struggling to accept the weight of his defeat on his own stage. He was supposed to be the one receiving the ovation, but the spotlight no longer belongs to him. The audience, which once adored him, now seems more distant, as if he had lost a part of his essence by attempting to undermine the true power of art and the person he so greatly underestimated. The journalists, who had once been eager to capture every movement of Caroline, now shift their focus. The critical words that had been prepared earlier are replaced by a new narrative, that of a woman who had overcome a significant personal and artistic hurdle. Their stories will no longer be about politics or ideology, but about talent, resilience, and true freedom of expression. The applause from the audience continues, but now is collective, a recognition not only of Caroline's performance, but of her internal struggle and the strength she has shown. Amidst murmurs of approval, some people approach, still stunned by what they have just witnessed. What began as an ideological battle has now turned into a celebration of authenticity, courage, and pure talent. Caroline finally stands slowly. This is not a victory of ego, but of reconciliation. She meets Raphael's gaze and, for the first time that night, smiles genuinely. Not because she has defeated anyone, but because she has finally triumphed over herself. She is more than a political label or a constructed image. She is an artist, a woman, and, above all, a person capable of reinventing herself, of facing her own fears, and in doing so, earning the respect and admiration of everyone around her. The applause begins to subside slowly, but the energy in the room lingers. Caroline, now standing, takes a deep breath, the air thick with a sense of relief and renewal. She does not look at the audience with the pride of someone who has won a contest. Her expression is calm, introspective, as if she has just traversed a long and winding path. The piano, with its black and white keys, is now simply a symbol of something deeper, the liberation of a part of herself she had ignored for years. She turns to Francisco, who is still there, standing, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and something more difficult to identify. There is respect in his eyes, but also a certain discomfort, as if the truth Caroline has just revealed is a mirror he didn't know he needed to face. He, who had tried to destabilize her with his arrogance, now finds himself confronted not only by her ability at the piano, but by the strength of her authenticity. He is no longer the center of attention, and, in a rare moment of vulnerability, he feels the weight of that. Raphael approaches Caroline, and his words are simple but full of meaning. "You were incredible." Caroline does not respond immediately. She simply looks at him, smiling with a sincerity that few have seen. The battle she fought was not just against Francisco or the expectations of the crowd. It was against herself, against that part of her soul she had pushed aside in order to follow a rigid, calculated path. She has regained something far greater than a public victory. She has reclaimed her identity. The gala continues around them, but Caroline's moment has transcended the night. She is no longer just the government's spokesperson or the young politician with an inflexible posture. She is a woman who, by allowing herself to be vulnerable, has become even stronger. Her true power doesn't come from the ideology she defends, but from the courage to be who she truly is without masks or disguises. As the night goes on, with laughter and conversations gradually resuming, Caroline reflects on what she has just experienced. The world, she knows, will still watch her with critical eyes. But from now on, she will not define herself by others' expectations. She will choose her own narrative. And by doing so, she will inspire others to do the same, to embrace their own truths and free themselves from the chains that keep them bound to roles they never chose. As she walks through the hall, she feels that she has finally found a balance. It's not about winning or losing. It's about being true to herself, and in doing so, redefining what it means to be free. Caroline slowly steps away from the stage, still feeling the vibration of the music in her fingers. The hall is filled with murmurs, but none of it matters now. For the first time in a long time, she isn't concerned with judgments or expectations. She has found herself again. The lights around her begin to soften, creating an intimate, almost magical atmosphere. The piano remains there, a silent testament to what has just happened. Francisco watches from afar, wordless, while the audience, once divided, now shares something in common: admiration. The screen gently fades to black, and then a phrase appears at the center. True strength lies in embracing who we really are. Silence settles for a moment, followed by a soft, inspiring soundtrack. Without needing any more words, the video invites the viewer to reflect. And before it ends, a message appears on the screen. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because we all have a forgotten part of ourselves waiting to be rediscovered. The image slowly fades away, leaving only the feeling that something powerful has been lived.